That's right, that's right. If the text is purple, that means you've got to do something, all right? The first thing I'm going to do is we're going to hand out some clickers, all right? We're going to make this interactive. Now, all we're going to do is I'm going to ask you some questions, and you're going to tell me some answers as part of making the session interactive. All right, if I give you those, if I give you a bunch, if you pass them on. So I'm not going to talk to you for 45 minutes and then have two people ask me questions. I'm going to ask you lots of questions, just to see whether you agree with me and to get a sense of how we think as a room full of plagiarism nerds about this issue. Now, I should reassure you, because I made a joke about this yesterday to a colleague and it backfired horribly. This is not a research project, all right? I'm not going to keep these data or do anything with them. This is just a way of making this session somewhat interactive. Have we run out? We've only got 33. Have we got a right side bias to the room? We'll factor that into our analysis. Okay, so working with technology is almost as dangerous as working with children and animals. So I want to make sure that this works by just asking you a general knowledge question. Okay? And let you to understand how the clickers work. All right? I want you to tell me who is the odd one out from this group. All right? And if you've never used clickers before, there's just some numbers on the front. You press the number that corresponds to your answer. It's as simple as that. Almost. If you've ever seen Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I'm asking the audience. And then if I come over here, I can see how many of you have responded. And I can probably see how many of my clickers have flat batteries. 29. Any advance on 29? Anyone still thinking? 30. All right, that's a nice round number. Ah. Now, that is interesting, because you've got the right answer. You weren't supposed to get the right answer, which is another risk of using technology in an interactive approach. All right, now you could create any sort of rationale for why one of these people might be the odd one out, all right? But the answer that I'm presenting to you is Mozart. And the reason that Mozart is the odd one out is because he was a ghostwriter, all right? All the others have used ghostwriters, mostly to write books or to write music, although some of those are only allegations, okay, before we get ourselves into trouble. Now, this tells us three things. This tells us that ghostwriting is part of everyday life. Some very important and powerful people use it, and they use it mostly fairly openly. They want to write their book, they don't want to write it themselves, they get a ghostwriter to do it for them, and they help out. This slide tells us also two other things, all right? First of all, where do you think I got this information from? I got it from Wikipedia. All right, I just looked it up on Wikipedia, famous examples of ghostwriting. Yeah, there's a few. Bung it on a slide. Bung my reputation on a slide in front of all of you on the basis of Wikipedia. This happens all day, every day. All right, this is modern life. The second thing, or the third thing this slide tells us, is I lied to you about this. I told you this was a general knowledge question to test clickers, but that's not true. It was to make the point about ghostwriting. I didn't really seriously mislead you in any sort of criminal way, but I bent the truth a little bit to make a point. This also is a part of everyday life. All right? The truth is a movable feast, depending upon the circumstance. All right, so I'm going to talk about one thing which is part of the idea of the truth of a movable feast, and that's ghostwriting. My day job is at Swansea University. I'm the head of learning and teaching for the medical school, but that's not why I'm here. I'm going to tell you who I am and why I'm here. The punchline is, it's because I'm a plagiarism nerd. But why am I a plagiarism nerd? Because I'm interested in things that aren't true, all right? Myths. There are a lot of them, and they do very well. They spread and they thrive. And I'm interested in them in a lot of areas. I started out being interested in them. My background is in the life sciences and neuroscience, and we get very upset as life scientists because we think that the media does a terrible job of reporting our wonderful scientific findings. And it's true, they do a terrible job. But the reason they do a terrible job is largely because they're told terrible things by scientists, and they then just reproduce what it is they're told by people that they think they should trust. So we have a couple of projects going on there looking at how widespread belief is in various scientific myths, and also how those myths spread. I have a similar interest in education. Education is something for which there is very good evidence upon which to base policy, but that evidence very rarely sees the light of day. Most teacher training programs still tell us that we should identify our students' learning styles and tailor our instruction to match that. It's a complete myth. There's no evidence for that whatsoever, and there are plenty of things like it. And that has led me into being interested in academic integrity generally, why people get into difficulty, and specifically the thing we're going to talk about today, which is ghostwriting. Okay, so we're going to talk about what it looks like, what could we do about it, and then I'm going to tell you what I think we should do about it, and you're all going to tell me that I'm wrong. Okay, what does it look like? This is what it looks like. This is what it has always looked like. This relationship has been around for as long as education has been around. All right, a student needs to produce an assignment, and for some reason doesn't want to, can't, whatever, recruits a third party who does it for them. All right, this has always been the case that students have done this. In the last generation, though, this has become a lot easier to do, largely because of the advent of the internet. Companies can now make that relationship happen much more simply and quickly than it used to do. That started out through the development and expansion of large mills, paper mills, data banks of pre-written essays that students could search to find an essay similar to the one that they were trying to write, and then use that to inform their assignment. Companies are now a little bit more bespoke. They can write a very custom and specific essay for an individual. You give the company the details of what you want. They then give it to one of their writers, or they may auction it off on an internal private auction where they say to their writers who wants to do this, and the writers bid for the opportunity to do it, and the company then gives the essay back to the student. This same process can happen in the public domain using various sites that are a bit like an eBay for essay writing, and I'll show you what all of these look like in a bit more detail, and we'll talk about some of the evidence for all of these to help us understand what ghostwriting looks like. And the final piece of the puzzle is that many companies are really very small operations. They're a 1- or 2-person band, and they're really just a middleman, and they will use these public auctions as their way of conducting business. All right, so let me ask you another question. You'll notice it's purple. I want you to tell me how much you agree with this statement, that the use of ghostwriters by students, it's not just students that do this, but we're focusing on students today. The use of ghostwriters by students is currently a serious problem for higher education. Do you think do you agree with that? Or not? Am I over-enthusiastic, over-interpreting the damage that this problem may do? Where did we get to last time? 30? All right. 29 will do. Okay, again, you weren't supposed to say that, but that's okay. Most of us, 76% of us, think that this is a problem, and there are a small number of us who are not quite so convinced, but nobody thinks that this is not a problem. Okay, now I'm going to tell you all about what the problem looks like, and then I'm going to ask you that same question again and see if your answers have changed. All right, so pre-written essays. Very briefly, what does it look like? There are essays, websites, many of you will be familiar with them. You go to them, there are hundreds of thousands of essays available. They offer they enter into some sort of contract with a student, like a freemium model where the student gets access to bad essays that are free, and they pay more and more as a subscription, and they get better and better quality essays. Or they submit their own essays in return for getting access to essays, and the more they submit, the more they get access to, the bigger the database gets. Turnitin has access to a lot of data. All right? And every now and then they analyze these data, and they put a white paper on their website to tell us what some of the things that they have found. In 2012, they published a white paper where they had looked at all of the 28 million assignments that had been submitted through them in higher education in one calendar year. And they looked at where the non-original text had come from. The most popular source of text matching was Wikipedia. No great surprise. Wikipedia alone accounted for 4% of unoriginal text in all higher education assignments in the United States. Second most popular source, the second single most popular source, was a site called oppapers.com. Does anybody know what OP stands for? Other People's. Okay, otherpeoplespapers.com. This is their logo, research papers and essays for all. That's just one of these paper mills. What Turnitin did is they classified all those sites that they thought were paper mills. They called them in 2012 cheat sites. Okay? And they lumped them all together, and all of these sites together accounted for 19% of all the unoriginal text in higher education assignments. That's a lot. All right? 19% of the unoriginal text in your students' assignments is coming from these sites. Now, most of these sites don't exist independently anymore. They've all been swallowed up by one big site called Study Mode, which is still a repository of pre-written academic material. Now, 19% is a lot, but 19% is certainly not an accurate estimate, because the way these sites work, as I said, is you either have to pay or enter into some sort of contract to get behind a paywall to get access to a lot of the essays. Right? And the Turnitin machine often cannot get through that paywall, so the amount of unoriginal text is almost certainly higher than 19%. It's big. It's a lot of it. Okay. We'll look very briefly at the companies. And let me just... Okay. If we simply Google by essay, you can see that there are a lot of companies. And if we scroll down, there are a lot more companies. And if we get to the bottom and we go on to the next page, there are a lot more companies. And there are some news stories, but there are a lot more companies than there are news stories. And we could keep going until lunchtime, and we would keep finding more and more and more companies. And you'll see that there are some related searches, online reviews. They want to know, is this a good company, is it a bad company? Can I buy one that isn't plagiarized? I want to buy a cheap one, and so on, and so on. All right, now I'll show you briefly what one of these companies looks like a bit later on. But the simple message is a very quick Google search for by essay or custom essay or term paper finds you lots and lots and lots of ways that you can buy one. It's a very well established concept. All right, they're out there, and there are a lot of them. And I'm missing a slide that says it's well established, which is going to come up later on, and we'll conveniently ignore that and move on, shall we? All right. Let's skip round then to the public auction, because the fact that a lot of this takes place in public allows us to see a lot of the data and allows us to actually do some research. Now, like I said, the way that this happens in public is often through sites like Freelancer, all right? And they operate a sort of eBay for work, all right? Now, I want to say, before we get any further, that Freelancer is a good thing, all right? All it does is it puts freelancers in contact with people that want to employ them, okay? It's not a cheat site or a custom essay writing site. And you can see this is the Freelancer jobs and projects page. They advertise jobs in various different categories. I don't understand what any of this means, other than it's probably got something to do with computers and is done by younger people than me. But you can see that there are hundreds of categories, and in there are hundreds and hundreds of jobs. But if you scroll down and down and down, there is a section for academic writing. And if you were to go in there, you would see that there are jobs posted where a person is asking for sometimes a legitimate academic writing article, and sometimes something that doesn't look quite so legitimate. And again, we're taking a risk by going blindly into a page. One academic writing essay, 2,750 words on healthcare, within 10 hours, no time wasters, etc., etc. All right? Now, just in case we didn't find one, here's one I prepared earlier. Now, this is one I took from a couple of years ago, and I picked it because somebody wants an essay written on ethics. And there's a nice story in there somewhere, isn't there? All right, and this is basically how it works. Somebody posts the description of what they want, a 3,000-word essay on ethics, see the attached file for more details, I need it done by the 13th of January. All right, and in this file here, when you as educators and instructors, when you write your assignment brief with all the details of what you want your students to do and the deadline and the word count and the sources and the referencing guidance, etc., and you put it on your virtual learning environment, in some cases, this is where it ends up. That's all this document is. So this person wants this done by the 13th of January, and they posted it on the 10th of January, which is slightly longer than the example I just showed you, but is still a very short period of time. Now, what then happens is that various people who want to, freelancers who want to write this, they bid for the opportunity to do the work, all right? And so they specify how much they want to be paid to do it, and how many days they will deliver the job in, all right? Now, you can see, possibly, that I've taken out what the average bid was, because I want you to tell me how much you think it cost, all right? A 3,000-word essay on ethics to a university standard in 3 days. Now, the job was posted in dollars. I'm conscious that this is a European plagiarism conference, so here are your options in dollars, American dollars, and here are your options in euros. Obviously, the American dollars options are much easier because those are the ones I wrote first. But is it anywhere from under £100 all the way over to over £1,500? How much do you think that essay cost? And just to remind you, 3,000 words, university essay on ethics in 3 days. Now, okay, I won't prejudge your answers that you've. All right, 27. We're losing people at the back. They're falling asleep. All right, what do we think? You're good. You're very good. But that's all right. That means that we have an understanding about this as a group. What do we say? The most common answer is between 100 and 250, and then we have some people who think it's under $100, some people who think it's a little bit more, and then a few above that. Now, of course, you've probably divined through question spotting of a multiple choice question that my intention is to show you that this is cheap, so you've guessed towards the cheap end of the spectrum. You're absolutely right. This is 132 American dollars. All right, now, that's the average bid. Okay? What the poster is saying is, I'm prepared to accept bids between $30 and $250. Okay? It is by no means inconceivable, and I have seen numerous examples of a job like this being done for $30, $40, $50. Okay? Remember, this is the average of 23. So there are plenty of people who are offering to do it for far less. It's cheap. All right? It's big and it's cheap. Now, one of the things we're often told, when this first came about, and this has only been around for a few years, or we've only been studying it for a few years, one of the ideas about how we might deal with it was to shorten the amount of time that students have to do an assignment. Right, don't give them 3 months, give them 3 weeks, and there's less time for them to post it on Freelancer and get the essay back and check if it's all right, la 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 la. Okay? Now, you can probably see just from the 2 examples we've looked at that that's unlikely to be effective, but a colleague and I took advantage of the fact that you can see how much time the essay is wanted in, what the required turnaround time is on Freelancer and sites like it. So we took a day off, we sat in Starbucks, and we just crunched through a whole bunch of these adverts to see how long it takes to get an assignment. The mean was 5 days, okay? Only 2/3 of them actually specified a time by which they want it, but of those 2/3, the mean was 5 days. And you can see various bits of the communication between the writer and the poster on Freelancer, and as best we can tell, the vast majority of them appear to have been delivered on time. Okay, although we can't obviously verify that truly without speaking to the people. 24% of those 68%, a reasonable number, requested a turnaround time of less than a day, just like the one that we looked at. And in the vast majority of cases, it was delivered. This is the most important finding from this slide, and perhaps one of the most important findings in the whole presentation. For every successful bid, there were 10 other people who said, yes, I can do it for the price you want in the time you want. Okay? So this is a buyer's market. Whatever we do to this market, there's a lot of spare capacity because there's far more people saying they can do stuff than people who actually want it at the moment. We concluded from this that shortening the amount of time you give students to do an assignment will not fix this problem. All right? We were thinking in terms of weeks. It's already down to 5 days in a buyer's market. You shorten the turnaround time even more, you start to lose the validity of the assessment you're asking students to do. All right, so it's big, it's cheap, and it's really, really quick. And there's my well-established slide. But that's okay, because that synthesizes the 3 previous sections, doesn't it? All right. Now, one of the things we often get asked when we tell colleagues about things like this is, okay, so how big a problem is this? And you've probably met people yourself who will say, what are you worried about? You know, I've never seen a student do this. Of course you haven't, because there's very little way in which you could detect that they have done it. So we have a couple of projects ongoing to try and look at the extent of this issue. But at the moment, all we really have are questionnaire surveys where people have asked students, have you ever done this? And they've told us that they have or they haven't. And there's a lot of problems with that sort of methodology, especially an issue like this, but that's where we're at the moment. Here are 2 studies that have looked at that in the last couple of years. The most recent one was a study in Saudi Arabia. Students were asked, amongst other things, have you ever purchased an assignment? 22% of them said, yes, they had. A similar study a year earlier, conducted by Turnitin on 2,000 students, asked them again a variety of questions, one of which is, have you ever purchased an essay? 7% of them said, yes, they have. So if we take those 2 together, 14, 15%. Now, like I said, there's a lot of problems with this sort of methodology in an issue like this, but even if that figure is vaguely accurate, 14% of students in higher education are willing to tell Turnitin, who many of them see as the plagiarism police, are willing to tell them that they've bought an essay. That's a lot of students. Okay. The other thing that students can tell us is what they think should happen as a result of this. Now, this is a research question that I used in a research study. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the students, and I'm going to see what you think. All right? Now, this is the most complicated slide you're going to see, so we'll walk through it very gently. There's a scenario-based approach. It's very common in academic integrity. You show people a scenario and you ask them what you think they think should happen. So this scenario is that there's a student who has no time to write an essay because they're going on holiday, and the student is student X. Student X is a second-year undergrad. 50% of the module mark is accounted for by this essay, and student X has to do 6 modules in the year in order to progress to the 3rd year. So X orders the essay from an online company. It's an original essay. It's written by a ghostwriter. It's correctly referenced. X reads it and says, yeah, I think that's about right, puts their name on it, submits it as if it was their own work. All right. Is that okay? And if it's not okay, what should happen? And you can answer both those questions with one press of a button. Okay? All the way from, yes, it's fine, the student should just lose marks for poor academic practice. No, it's not okay, and they should be given a warning for academic misconduct and lose marks. Or it's not okay, and they should fail the assignment, they should fail that whole module, they should fail that whole year, or they should be withdrawn from the university. What do you think should happen? And don't try and infer anything else about student X. You're making the decision, admittedly somewhat artificially, based solely on the facts on the slide. In this case, student X would fail the year, they would stop, and they would come back again next year as a second-year student. All right, we race up to 27, and there are 3 people who are thinking about it. 29, all right. Okay, so we think, as a group, that X should fail that module. All right? And a small number of us, was 10% of 29, so 2.9 people, let's call it 3, think that X should be thrown out. And 2 people think that this is okay. We'll have to have a chat about that afterwards. All right, what would happen, not what should happen, what would happen is that X would be withdrawn from the university. All right, that's the standard penalty for this sort of act in the UK higher education, as determined by the Project Amber plagiarism tariff in 2007-2008. That's basically what happens across the sector. That's what happens at my institution.
Just to clarify, Phil, so
Yes.
And they can't come back.
No.
The standard in Australia is you get suspended with the option of return at some future point.
Now, the Project Amber tariff was done 7 years ago, when this was a very much smaller issue, or at least was perceived as much smaller. So who knows what it is, what the sector would be now? Yes?
Regardless of whether it's a first offense?
Yes. Although that's not the case for, the issue of first offense is considered for all other forms of academic integrity issues, but not for this. All right, this is what the students told us. Now, unsurprisingly, and this has been found for a variety of academic integrity situations, the students are very lenient. Now, this again is a complicated slide. I will talk you through it. Here are all the options you have just considered. They are arranged around what the university would do based solely on that information. And as I've told you, what the university would do is they would withdraw that student. You can see that a small number of students said that the student should be withdrawn. The vast majority of them think that the students should simply fail the assignment. Okay? That by the assignment, with no mitigating circumstances whatsoever, no attempt to do the work, all that should happen to student X is they should fail that assignment, i.e. there's no risk whatsoever, there's no penalty whatsoever. And as with all studies like this, there are a few who recommend an even more lenient penalty. But the vast majority of them think it's less of a big deal than the university does. Now we can compare that to other scenarios presented in the same way. Okay, by collapsing all those options into those students who recommend a penalty that's more serious than the university would impose, those that recommend the same penalty, and those that would recommend a more lenient penalty. Now, it's a slightly artificial comparison because we're going to compare various scenarios for which the standard outcome is different. Okay, we cannot have a more serious penalty for essay purchase than being thrown out, so there's no blue whatsoever. But you can see that for multiple situations, so plagiarism in multiple modules, copying and pasting from Wikipedia with no references, copying and pasting from a friend, and an example of weak academic practice. In all of the academic misconduct situations, the students recommend a more lenient penalty than they would get, and the situation for which that is the most disparate, with the distance between the university and the student is greatest, is the purchase of an essay. So students know it's wrong. All right? There were very, very few people who said, students who said, this is correct. And this was 600 students we did this with. But they think that it's relatively not a big deal. It's less of a big deal than the university think it is. And there's a big mismatch between those two things. All right, so that's what it looks like. It's big, it's cheap, it's quick, it's versatile, it's well established. All right, those are the characteristics, as we currently understand them, of the use of ghostwriters in education. Now, you told me already that you thought this was quite a serious problem. Having told you these things about it, has your view changed at all? Re-rate your agreement with the statement that the use of ghostwriters by students is currently a serious problem for higher education. All right, for us as a sector, is this a big problem for us? Ah, we've reached the full complement again. 31. That's okay. Some people just don't want to answer. They don't want to be considered. That's fine. Okay, so we've shifted. All right. I didn't mean to scare you, but I wanted to show you what this looks like. And I think even you, a group of people who understand this issue very well, can see, have changed a little bit your perspective on this. And we now, the majority of us completely agree that this is a serious problem. So what could we do about it? Now, when I present this to colleagues who don't know anything about this issue and aren't really interested, and I say, oh my God, look at this, look at this, look at this, the first thing they say often is, how is that legal? You've got to make that legal. You've got to, that should be, that is illegal. If we consider the language of academic integrity in the context of the law, all right, plagiarism, using someone else's work as if it were your own, is one definition. The definition of fraud, according to the United Kingdom Serious Fraud Office, an act of deception intended for personal gain or to cause loss to another party. Those things sound quite similar. All right, one is criminal currently, one is not. Just to reference the UK Serious Fraud Office, in case they think I'm ripping off the Fraud Office. Well, are they legal? Well, as part of Tracy's Springer Handbook of Academic Integrity. Myself and Christopher Lang, who's the deputy president of the ICAI and a lawyer by background, we wrote a chapter about this issue. And I wrote largely about the stuff that I've just told you, and Chris wrote about the legal aspect of this, based upon some work that had been done for the ICAI. The overall conclusion is yes. Everything I've shown you is currently legal. Should we do something about that? What do you think? Should we try and change the law so that everything that I've shown you could be, or not everything, that some part of what I've shown you could be addressed using a legal approach? All right? Not just the students. We could target the companies, we could target the systems they work through, we could target all sorts of facets of the operation. Do you think we should do that? And when I say we, I mean educators, institutions, governments, the higher education sector in general. All right, I'm starting to run out. Oh, we got to 30. 31? Somebody's coffee's kicked in. All right, now we have a wide spread. The most popular answer is that a third of you think that we should. But there's a wide spread of options, and had I had a clicker, I would have clicked to the other end. I'm not sure at this stage that we necessarily should pursue a legal approach, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why, and then you can tell me that I'm wrong. Okay? This is one of those companies, okay, and I've anonymized it so that we don't give them any free advertising and we don't create the idea that this is one company's problem. When you search for a company, this is very representative of what you land on. They offer you all sorts. They give you a quick quote. And what they normally have right down in the corner, but on their front page, is a disclaimer. All right? And that disclaimer says, no, getting custom writing help from this company is a legitimate academic study aid, just like hiring a personal tutor. Okay? What the companies do, those that are worried about this, and not all of them are, but those that are worried about this, they say, you've asked me to do something and I've done it. What you do with it is up to you. And the responsibility for committing an act of academic misconduct belongs to the student. There are lots of companies that don't do this, that are overt, but where companies are worried about it, this is how they get around the legal issue. And it's difficult to see a way around that. Now, in those cases where countries where there are laws, there's a law in New Zealand and there are some state-specific laws in the US, the way that that is addressed is by considering whether the company ought reasonably to have known what the student was going to do with the assignment. All right? And in the vast majority of cases, it's very difficult to argue that the company knew anything other than the student was going to submit it for their own purpose. And just to cite, there's a website hosted by Florida State with some work that was done for the ICAI that lists all the current legal papers relating to this issue. Now, pursuing a legal approach will be very complicated. You've seen this picture about 20 minutes ago, and I'm guessing that Irene and I both did a Google image search for a copyright-free picture of the world. All right? And this is the most common and attractive one. You have a copyright on yours. Mine looks slightly different to yours. Do I need to sign mine? All right. This is one reason which sums up why a legal approach is difficult. All right? Let's just say we have a student. Let's be British and self-deprecating about it and say that the student is in London. All right? And that student has decided, student X, I want to buy an essay. So they do that Google search, they click on a company, and it just so happens that that company is in South Africa. It's in Johannesburg. All right? And that company is really one of these middlemen operations, and so they take the information provided by the student and they post it on one of these eBay-type sites. Let's just say, for example, it's Freelancer, though other sites are available. Freelancer is headquartered in Sydney, Australia. All right? Freelancer posts the information, and a writer is recruited from India. That writer writes the essay, provides it back to the company in Johannesburg. The company in Johannesburg gives it back to the student in London. It's an entirely hypothetical, but in no way contrived example. This is how it works. Whose law is it? All right, who are we trying to prosecute and under what circumstances? And who actually are we trying to prosecute? Who is committing the crime? Is it the company in Johannesburg? Is it the writer? Is it Freelancer? Is it all of them? It quickly becomes very, very complicated. Now, This is a very simplistic example of a very complex problem. I showed you the results of some research that said that for every successful bidder, there were 10 others. Those 10 others are going to be located across the world. They are all offering to write an assignment for this student. Do we go after all of those? Are we certain that they all are located in the place that they say they are in the little avatar on Freelancer? Freelancer has 5 worldwide offices, just as well as the one in Sydney. We have no way of knowing for certain which one of those is the one responsible for putting the advert on the website. And all of this becomes further complicated still when we consider another powerful trend in higher education. The student may live in London, but they may be enrolled on a distance learning course in San Francisco. All right? Where do you begin? Whose law is it? Who's the victim? Under what circumstances do we proceed? So there are a number of complications. Now, I've used the title "Law is not the answer" just because it makes a nice, snappy title that sounds like "War is not the answer," and I've overdone it a little bit. Law is not the answer, question mark. I don't know this for sure, but I have concerns about the effort that we might put into this. And the reasons are because we don't know whose law it is. We don't know necessarily who's the victim. Is it the other students? Is it the institution? Is it the student that buys an essay being guaranteed a 90% and only gets 65? There seems that there are cases where that could be legitimate. In any cases, we wouldn't see all those pink arrows because it's very, very hard to detect. Prevention may be better than cure, and there is this defense that we're not doing anything wrong, we're just writing you a study aid. Perhaps in 1 in 100,000 cases they might be doing that. Now, there are some arguments for a legal approach to this. The first is that it shifts the context of the discussion. You tell students, it's not only is this wrong, this is illegal. You tell companies, not only is what you're doing, I think, difficult and undesirable, but it's also illegal. And it's also just one thing that we might do. Right? There's nothing to say that we need only pursue a legal approach, but there's not many of us. Okay. There are other things that have been suggested. Various reviews have been written about this a couple of years ago. This is only one of them. The things that are suggested are often suggested in the context of trying to detect the posting of custom assignments on these websites. Things like tagging the information with something that you can then search for, incentivizing students to report on their peers, bidding on postings that you think are suspicious. If you search for something that looks like your work and you find it, you bid to then catch the student. I don't think any of these things will have any sort of impact, and they will just waste the time of the people who are doing them and sour the atmosphere in what is already a very difficult conversation about academic integrity. The commonly suggested approach of reducing turnaround time to prevent the problem, as we've seen, is not going to work. So these are other things that have been suggested. The last few minutes then, I'm going to tell you about what I think, one approach that I think we should take. And one approach that I think is undervalued and underutilized in trying to deal with this. This, I think, is largely a question of assessment. All right? Many of you will be familiar with the language of assessment, the principles of assessment. A good assessment is one that is valid, that tests what it's supposed to test. It's reliable. You get the same result twice if you do the test twice. It's inclusive, it's equitable, it's fair, and it's practical. That's what makes a good assignment. And then there are other issues very much related to this problem. Many countries make use of anonymous marking for very good reason. Class sizes are going up. Distance learning is becoming more and more prevalent, and the workload of academics is generally considered to be going up as well. These are all important issues when we consider the broader issue of ghostwriting. But the most important one for me is validity. An assignment that can and has been treated in this way is not a valid assignment. All right? If you ask your students to write an essay that they can get somebody else to do in a matter of hours, you're not really testing what it is you're supposed to be testing. So I've run various workshops about this around the world, actually, and I've told people similar things to what I've told you, and I've told them that we want to think about this from an assessment perspective, and I've asked them, what do you think we should do from an assessment design perspective to deal with this, or to prevent this, or to make it harder to happen? And this is a large part of what's in the book chapter, is my synthesis and my understanding and my reading of the literature and people's views on this. The thing that comes out most often is we go back to a more traditional form of education, and we talk to our students and we assess them face to face. Okay, we either have an oral presentation or a viva, or we make use of technology and we have them prepare a narrated video assignment where they tell us what they think, and we can hear and we can see them. We should focus more on practical assessment. Okay, we should focus, if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, we should focus more on those higher levels and what students can do, not on the facts that they can tell us or the things that they can do in an essay. Now, that's not to say you can't do higher order, assess higher order outcomes with an essay, but if we focus more on very practical things, it's harder for it to be contracted out. A simple algorithm to triangulate results. If students suddenly get amazing results in an essay when they've been bombing all along, that might alert us to an issue. Personalizing assessments, making them more about the student's experience, more about what the student is doing, and this ties back into practical and professional assessments, make them about what the student is doing while they're on, say, a placement or in a lab. Make the assessment questions very specific. It's very specific to the local context and to the person. You want a person to be able to write professionally, critically, and reference correctly, have them do it in a long, in-class assessment rather than giving them a 3-week essay. And it's often suggested that we should limit anonymous marking. I'm reporting this as what's often suggested to me. I'm not so sure that we should do this, but certainly in some countries anonymous marking is not very common, and some of you may have heard of Dave Tomar, the show called Shadow Scholar, who was one of the people to first lift the lid and publicize this issue. And one of the things he says over and over again is that this is a problem of academics not getting to know their students, and so they don't know when something's amiss. The flip side to that, of course, is that we all carry unconscious bias and prejudice, whether we like it or not, and it's very important that we eliminate that as best we can from the assessment process. Some people think we should have more exams, right? And that's something we can row about later on if you want. These are there's not just assessment things that we could do, assessment design tips that we could apply to try and prevent this issue. There are other things that come out, and they're all very good. Create a culture of academic integrity. All right? Address the issue. Why are students doing this? Dave Tomar will tell you it's because they struggle with English, because they're weak academically, and because they may also have a lot of money and not be very motivated to work. But his words, not mine. Let's address that. If we address that, then we make temptation harder. Make it easier to do the right thing, and by doing the right thing means doing the essay correctly. Make it very easy for students to give them the tools and the resources to be able to do the thing that you actually want to assess. A very simple approach, one which has not actually been properly evaluated, which seems to make logical sense. Spend 10 minutes going through that list I showed you on Google, take the list of all those websites, block access to them on campus, and when students click on it, they get a warning that says, you shouldn't be going here. All right? Link them to the Academic Writing Center instead. I ran this session as a workshop in Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, and I was all set, and I got to the first website, and I went to it, and Baylor said, no, you can't do that, which undermined my workshop, but I thought that's not a bad idea. Publicize and implement severe penalties is the other side to that. Students have to know that this is not a good thing to do, and if it does happen, we have to be seen to be doing something about it. But I think the single most important thing we can do is spread the word. Because whenever I speak to colleagues who've been educators for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and they care about it, and they care about teaching, and they care about their students, and you show them these sites, and they have never seen them before, and they are agog. And the more people that know about it, the more people are thinking about what we might do about it. All right, so to summarize everything that I've told you, ghostwriting it's an old principle. It's widespread in education, it's very cheap, it's very quick, it's very hard to detect, and it can do pretty much anything. The legal issues are complicated. It's not to say we shouldn't consider them, but they are complicated. And if we can prevent the problem, if we can shift the context to a situation where it's just very hard to do in the first place, then we may not have to worry about all those other things. All right, some references, some of the papers that I've talked about, both mine and those of Turnitin and others, and a link to the ICAI site. I can put that back up somewhere central later on. And does anybody have any questions? Furious nodding from the center. All right, thank you.